wishing everybody a happy Republic Day 2022. This webinar is an initiative of SCMI and CISRS to deliberate on the theme Future of Constitutional Democracy in India. Allow me to highlight the sequence of the meeting. Welcome speech, Reverend Dr. Y.T. Veneraj, Director of Christian Institute for the Study of Religion and Society. Speaker, Aruna Roy. The guest speaker will be introduced formally to us in some time by Reverend Dr. Y.T. Veneraj. Response, Dr. Geevarghese Coorilos, Metropolitan, Chairperson, World Christian Federation. Vote of thanks and concluding remarks, we have Reverend Inbaraj J. Kumar, General Secretary, Student Christian Movement of India. Without further delay, I now invite Reverend Dr. Y.T. Veneraj, Director of Christian Institute for the Study of Religion and Society, for welcome address and also introduce the speaker. Sir, you may take the time.
Friends, as we are celebrating yet another anniversary of our nation's entry into the force of the Constitution, the Christian Institute for the Study of Religion and Society, CISRS, is really honored to propose this online platform for this Republic Day talk in association with the Student Christian Movement of India on the theme, the future of constitutional democracy in India. Both CISRS and SCMI are progressive Christian movements in India that have always been in forefront to uphold their uncompromising allegiance to the secular, democratic, progressive movements in this country. Especially CISRS is known for its clarion call to the Christian faith communities in India to participate in the process of nation building at the time of Indian independence. It also invoked the Christian communities to take a stand in favor of the marginalized and the excluded. At the period of the onslaught of the unilateral economic and development policies and patterns during the time of emergency in India. Since then, CISRS is more committed to organizing Christian faith communities in the South Asian region to envisage a more just, more sustainable, and more democratic world around us. It is out of this theological legacy and the democratic political concern, both CISRS and SCMI offer this online platform to think about the status and the future of our constitutional democracy in this country. Our nation's entry into the rule of law or becoming a democratic nation based on a written constitution was in fact a landmark in the process of making our public life in this country more just and dignified. It was a determinant political event in India through which we as a nation affirmed our commitment to continue to be a just, democratic political community. As the preamble to the Constitution declares, our nation stands for social, economic, and political justice of all its citizens, liberty of thought, experiences, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and fraternity that would assure the dignity of the individual and the unity and the integrity of the nation. But this constitutional identity, the leaders such as Ambedkar and Jawaharlal Nehru envisioned a political community that rises up all its differences and distinctions and move towards its fundamental goal of becoming a sovereign, democratic, and secular nation. However, it is so unfortunate to say that today we live in a crucial time, which is indeed a difficult time for democracy. Aruna Roy, in her seminal work, Listening to Grasshoppers, Field Notes on Democracy, clearly shows that our democracy is highly elitist, sectarian, and domineering. Only 10% of our society enjoys this democracy, that the rest are subdued to surviving through their poverty-stricken lives. Only the rich people and the multinational companies control the minorities, whether it is religious minority, linguistic minority, or sexual minority. They are at the verge of hatred, discrimination, and even genocide. Aruna Roy goes on to say that democracy without justice is democracy. What kind of democracy do we have today? What is the future of our constitutional democracy? Do the weak and the vulnerable have a future in this country? What are the effective ways to safeguard the basic tenets of our constitutional democracy in India today? These are the questions that we want to ask and discuss these days. I hope that our deliberations today will enlighten us with new insights and enable us to move forward and work for a more just, sustainable, and democratic world around us. Today, we have Aruna Roy with us to ignite our thoughts and deliberations. As we all know, Aruna Roy is a well-known social activist, academician, union organizer, and former civil servant. She is the one who founded the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangadan, MKSS, through which Aruna was able to move forward the right to information movement in India. We all know that Aruna was the key person behind the formulation of the Right to Information Act in 2005, which has made an incredible shift in people's participation in the public governance in India. She is still active in this process of making our civil society more democratic and justice oriented. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for us to have Aruna Roy with us today to offer the main talk on the theme, the future of constitutional democracy in India. A warm welcome to Aruna to this web talk. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Geevarghese Coorilos, the Metropolitan of the Syrian Jacobite Church in Kerala, is going to offer a response to the main talk from a biblical and theological perspective. Metropolitan Coorilos is known as global ecumenical theologian and a social thinker. Currently, he serves as the chairperson of the World Student Christian Federation and the chairperson of the Council of World Mission and Evangelism, CWME, Department of World Council of Churches in Geneva. Welcome, Bishop. We are happy to have you with us today. Thank you for your presence. Friends, it is indeed a privilege an honor for me to welcome you all to this virtual gathering on behalf of CISRS and SCMI. Let me acknowledge the presence of Reverend Impa Jayumar, the General Secretary of SCMI, the co-host of this program, and the former Director of CISRS, Reverend Dr. Benson Rajkumar, Honorable Committee and Council members of CISRS, unit members, program secretaries, senior friends and well-wishers of SCM, secular and theological fraternity from India and abroad. A warm, very warm welcome to all. May this time of conversation be a meaningful time for all of us to think about the status of our democracy and move forward as a nation to envisage a better society in and around us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Vinay Raj, for the welcome address and also introducing the speaker to us. Friends, this is the time to listen from our guest speaker. The speaker has already been introduced to us, so with great pleasure, I now invite Aruna Roy to take the time. Ma'am, you have to unmute your...
I begin with a thank you to the CISRS Bangalore and the SCMI. I am honored to be in the presence of the Bishop, Reverend Raj, and all of you distinguished friends. It's a particular pleasure for me today to be with all of you because of the way this country stands pitched, ready to take a road which was not envisaged at the time of independence, the time of framing the Constitution. As a person who was born a year before independence, and to some extent have grown with the nascent Indian nation, I would only like to say that between me and the national position on the Constitution, there is a growing chasm in difference today. So I would like to share with you the few ideas that I have, and I would request you to please disagree with me if you think you have disagreement, and dissented disagreement is the basis of all democracy. So I begin with requesting that all of you should really look at what I say critically, and if you feel like, express your differences of opinion. Let me begin with a personal introduction. My grandfather and my uncles went to the Men's Christian College in Chennai, Madras. My mother went to the Women's Christian College in Chennai, Madras. My father went to Loyola College in Madras, Chennai. My sisters went to Carmel Convent. My brother went to St. Columbus in Delhi. And I went to the Convent of Jesus and Mary in Delhi for the first 5 years of my schooling. None of us, I want to say, to the non-Christian community of bigots that we have grown in this country, that none of us are converted to Christianity, but we have learned to admire Jesus, to read the Bible, and we remain tolerant, secular Indians. So this fear psychosis that has come has been inexplicable for most of us. Why are we afraid? Fear comes from ignorance. And I think it's this ignorance that we need to address today in the large area of public opinion. You've invited me to speak on the occasion of the 72nd Republic Day on the future of constitutional democracy in India. And I would like to say there is a subtext to this. And the subtext is the question is under threat. We can't anymore question. We have to acquiesce. Now, if we acquiesce in a democracy and do not question that we are no better than being in a monarchy or being in a non-republic or being in a dictatorship or being in a fascist system, because what distinguishes a democracy and gives it the true strength of a vibrant society is the right to question. And I'm afraid today, the question is under threat. The right to difference is under threat. The right to dissent is under threat. And the right to disagree is under threat. And so I would begin with going back a little before independence and reminding us all about an invocation to the nascent republic, which was envisaged at the time when we were struggling for independence by a great poet, the poet who also gave us the national anthem and who wrote some of the most beautiful lines that, though oft repeated, have never become unpopular, nor have they become boring. So I'll begin with quoting the lines of Rabindranath Tagore, of Robi Babu, as they say in Bangla, of his Gitanjali, the famous lines that we all hold dear. And I will read those few lines to you, and I'll begin. And this is my invocation to a republic that should actually be a republic, to a nation that should really be tolerant. The nation should be proud of its diversity, proud of its complexities, proud of its variations and variables, proud of the many kinds of cultures that it has brought together. Most of you know this poem, but indulge me a bit. I'll read those lines. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out of the depth of truth, where timeless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert stand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. This was the invocation by a nationalist poet who stood looking at the dawn of independence and who saw the first rays of it coming, and who saw Gandhiji's campaign strengthen, who saw many of the things happen before he passed away, well before we became independent. He also contributed the national anthem to two extraordinary nations, India and what is called Bangladesh today. Born in Bangladesh, brought up in India, with his Vishwa Bharati located in Shantiniketan, he created a national anthem for India, but he also, one of his famous songs is also the national anthem of Bangladesh. We were a nation, we were proud of our heritage, but we welcomed everybody. We were thought of liberation and we thought of freedom in the widest possible sense. So when I was a child, I grew up with the idea that the Indian Constitution transformed a poet's dream into a sacred democratic text. There are many sacred texts. There are sacred texts for religion, but there is a sacred text for democracy. For those of us who believe that the democratic system is the only system under which we can function with freedom, with liberty, and with equality. The system itself of democracy is got to be monitored and contained within a concept. And that concept and that set of rule of law, what you mentioned, Reverend Vinay, the rule of law was framed within what we now call the Indian Constitution. When I grew up as a child, I heard my father, who was a lawyer, talk extensively about the extraordinary efforts of the Constituent Assembly, how there were disagreements, and for 2 years they sat and formulated what was a very, very difficult process and a complex process, and made the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India also was a difficult task, but it was a victorious task. It brought together the impossible of building together, stitching together different religions, different languages, differences in ethnicity, differences in so many ways, but stitch them together to form a cohesive voice which could call itself the Indian nation, where we saw each other as sisters and brothers, and we saw each other as being part of a very grand nation. Those who worked for the freedom also saw pitfalls of a divided and divisive India. It is not as if they didn't see it. And those of you who've seen Shyam Benegal's very interesting interpretation of the making of the Constitution will understand what I mean, because there were so many apprehensions and there were so many worries. But those who worked for the freedom saw a miniature continent, and with all its variables, they united it by a thread of identity as Indians. And despite the fact that there were persisting prejudices, still the caste system held good. There was divisiveness, there was caste, there was religion. We had one of the worst devastations at the time of partition. I still remember as a child growing up in partitioned India in New Delhi, where people, young children who came from Pakistan, what is now Pakistan, were part of old undivided India, selling things at the age of 4 to make a survival of their lives, to survive their lives and to earn a living. So we promised ourselves in the Indian Constitution very many important things. And I think the preamble to the Constitution is one of the most wonderful invocations of a sacred democratic text that I can think of. And believe me, that every time I chant the preamble, which I do now every time I begin a meeting, I chant the preamble. It brings to me the spirit of a religious prayer. It is a democratic prayer, and a democratic prayer that we will all live together in the secular fabric of this nation. It has promised us justice, social, economic, and political. And towards this end, there's been an effort made by so many people in this country, by the political system, by the executive, which has tried to implement the laws of the Constitution, by the judiciary, which has tried to maintain the spirit of the Constitution and give us redress, which instituted the whole concept of public interest litigation, so that those who are worried about the dismemberment of justice and constitutional values in society, social or economic, would go to the court. Today, we see all these systems in jeopardy. We see the social system taken over by a kind of extremist religious gundaism. I can't use any other word but that, hooliganism if you like, in which we are all threatened that if we do not follow a certain standardized format, we can't exist. We have a system in which Dalits and minorities are attacked, ravaged, and killed. We have an economic system, and I will tell you more of it later, but an economic system which is getting more and more unequal by the day. And I have some examples I'll give you later. And a political system in which institutions of political neutrality in terms of elections are threatened. And we have a political system in which politics has used religion, politics uses divisiveness to build vote banks and identity banks. Liberty, which was one of the most critical factors of this Indian Constitution. And for me, the primary workforce, the stimulation for my life, liberty of thought, expression, faith, belief, and worship has been threatened. My thought, I cannot think. There are many people now incarcerated in jails who have not done anything worse than think differently. They have had a thought pattern in which they have said they do not understand or believe or accept the norms. They are in jail. Many have been killed. Dabolkar was shot dead. Pansare was shot dead. Gauri Lankesh was shot dead only because they thought and expressed a difference. Faith, you know very well what has happened with the whole issue of faith. Belief and worship. So I want to talk and just quote George Orwell. When equality is threatened, and equality is threatened by all these various acts, because if there is no equality, there is no democracy. And it's the fundamental principle of democracy that we believe in equality. All these have been threatened, and I would like to quote from George Orwell. He says that in times of universal deceit, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. And today, those of us who speak the truth are in danger of being incarcerated, of being trolled, of being victimized, of being labeled people who are anti this or anti that. And all that we are saying is that there should be a constitutional validity to social action, public action, social interaction, and life. Of course, when you deny all this, you deny opportunity to people, you tab them and you standardize them, you brand them as X, Y, or Z, and therefore you deny them opportunity. And you have the most horrible attack on the notion of fraternity. Because fraternity, above all, is the most important bond between all of us. It is this fraternity of what we call brotherhood or sisterhood, of understanding that we are a family of people, that we are larger families of people, that we are bonded together, that actually makes this nation a vibrant nation. These things which I articulated are all found, these values are all articulated in the fundamental rights that we have in the first chapter of the Indian Constitution. The first chapter of the Indian Constitution is my Gita, my Bible, my Guru Granth, because as a person in public life, it is that which empowers me and also controls me, also monitors me to do my public action with both justice and with equality, and also examine myself when I err to see whether I am going beyond my limits to say or do something that is not quite right. But the directive principles of state policy went one step further. I live a life as a social activist because I'm empowered and mandated by the directive principles of state policy. This too is misinterpreted. Today we say that because India is a welfare state, that because India has got the socialist ideals of equality, of raising the level of the poorest, or improving the levels of the people who have been forever damned by caste, that we are actually striving to dismantle the peace and equanimity of the state. We are accused of being extremists when we demand that there should be a more equal society. But Article 38 of the Indian Constitution gives me the right. It says the state shall strive to promote the welfare of the people by securing and protecting as effectively as it may a social order in which justice, social, economic, and political shall inform all the institutions of national life. It hasn't said that it will only inform my actions, all the institutions of national life. So when we go and question an institution that does not deliver, an institution that does not deliver services to the poor, a ration shop that does not give rations, a pension system which strikes off the names of pensioners, when we question under the right to information law the validity of similar actions by plethora of structures of the Indian state, and the 80 lakh users of the right to information of the law today in this country are all democratic constitutional workers, because they are demanding from the institutions in national life, are you giving justice? Are you giving economic and political justice? Are you giving social justice? Are you giving us our rations, our pensions? Are you registering my FIR? Why, if not, why not? Give me factual evidence. And we are now actually not only right to information users, but we have become human rights defenders. More than 100 RTI users have been killed. Recently, one person in Rajasthan, his hands and legs were broken, rods were inserted into his legs and beaten up in front of the government authority by a mafia group in that village, which did not want its acts exposed. But we now have a system which condones violence. And for me, it's a worry, because if a system condones violence by silence, if not by provocation, then all kinds of violence in society will be unleashed. And today, remembering Ambedkar, I'll also remember Gandhi, that for him, non-violence was an important part of the process through which we would achieve justice. And that process is protected by the directive principles of state policy by giving me the right to ask for economic, political, and social justice from all aspects and institutions of national life. It says the state shall in particular strive to minimize the inequalities in income, endeavor to eliminate inequalities in status, facilities and opportunities, not only amongst individuals, but also amongst groups of people residing in different areas or engaged in different vocations. The effort to engage with this inequalities in income, inequality in employment, inequality in access, which is what our communities of people, the poor people I work with and live with, and I've lived with for 40 odd years of my life, 50 years now, actually. If you count the 10 years in the civil service, I have understood that it is not possible to get these facilities and these rights to people without using the right to freedom of expression and protest. So if you quell the right to freedom of expression, you really stagnate articulation of rights. And if you stagnate the articulation of rights, you cannot endeavor, as the Article 38(2) gives me, to eliminate inequalities in status, facilities, and opportunities. So I'm caught in a trap where my inequality is my stigma, and inequality is my life. Inequality is my fate if I do not articulate, and you do not allow me articulation. And that articulation, if I do articulate, you call me by 1,000 names, including calling me a Maoist, calling me a person who disrupts society, and of course, I'll come to it, and other worse things that have been said to us so far. In an effort to struggle for these constitutional rights, which we've been empowered by the directive principles of state policy, we mobilized. We mobilized in large numbers, and some of my friends are also in this group today. We mobilized in large numbers to fight for the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, where 29 million people are actually using the right to information law to stave off poverty. During COVID, when there was counter migration into the villages, if there had been no Manrega, there would have been no alternative employment to these millions of people who had to walk all the way home because of a 4-hour notice to shut down and vacate. The Prime Minister made very derogatory remarks, both about the right to information law and Manrega in the first parliament as soon as he took over as Prime Minister in 2014. He said one law, which is the right to information law, actually had paralyzed policy. And he said the Rural Employment Guarantee Act had brought in economic poverty. But I'd like to say today that if it hadn't been for Manrega and hadn't been for the right to information law, India's democracy would have been that much weaker. And we have had very famous economists come and say, and actually say that if Manrega is one of the best ways of addressing poverty and hunger, endemic hunger in the world. So these rights-based laws, and there were many others. There was a National Food Security Act, which we fought for. We fought for the Forest Rights Act. And we believed that to actually get the directive principles of state policy into action, we have to agitate, as Baba Sahib Ambedkar said, educate, agitate. So we have to agitate and organize. So organized agitation in the manner prescribed by Mahatma Gandhi, which was a non-violent method of civil disobedience that got us these rights-based laws. So the transference of the right of the citizen to initiate the dialogue for realizing constitutional rights for economic and social inequality. This dialogue will not be initiated by the people who have power. The initiation for equality will always be initiated will come from the people who do not enjoy equality. People who want equality, people who want justice will initiate it. People who enjoy impunity are not going to initiate a dialogue because they want to retain the impunity. So whether it is fight the right to information law from within the system or deny the Manrega because it's not possible to be so corrupt anymore, will not come from a system which has enjoyed the illegal fruits of graft, corruption, and of arbitrary justice. It will come from people who have borne the whip of injustice, borne the whip of inequality. So it is very peculiar that the Prime Minister should say that the last 75 years, we have talked about rights, and now we will talk about duties. We talk about rights because the system has not delivered according to its duties. If the system had delivered according to the duties prescribed for it by the Constitution, for it by the system, there would be no one sitting on the streets asking for rights. I would like to share with you that the fact that we stood and sat in hunger strikes or in dharnas for so many years to get the right to information law is not a joy. And I actually was just looking back on my life for the last 30 years, and I find that much of it has gone in public protest. And it's not a joy to sit without food, not to have access to toilets, not to have access to shelter, and to fight these battles. But it is we are sometimes driven by something. And that it's the drive to fight injustice and inequality that makes us suffer the discomfort and the inconvenience of public protest. So those of us who protested for rights have actually called the system to explain its lack of adherence or its lack of its obligation to deliver justice. So it's from me actually a plea that we understand that because there are no duties performed adequately, that we want the rights to remain. And in an unequal society, in a society in which inequality is ingrained into the social system, we will always need to have rights the right to protest, the right to agitate, the right to congregate, the right to have fraternity. I'll quickly call your attention to what has been famously called the Inequality Report by Oxfam, which brings out an Oxfam report every year. And I'll just quickly go through what it said. It is talked about India, and for India, the subtitle is Inequality Kills. Inequality kills is what the Oxfam report says, and it's all data. In 2021, 84% of households' income fell. But the number of billionaires has grown from 100 to 142. COVID has continued to ravage India, but India's healthcare budget has seen a 10% decline from the revised estimates of 2021. There was 6% cut in allocation for education, while the budgetary allocation for social security schemes has declined from 1.5% of the total budget to 0.6%. During the pandemic, that is from March 2020 to November 30th, 2021, the report says that the wealth of Indian billionaires has increased from rupees 23.14 lakh crores, that is 313 billion US dollars. I can't even think of that amount of money. It's beyond my mental imagination to get those figures. And to rupees 53.16 lakh crores, much more than that, almost double that, more than double that, has come to the Indian billionaires. And the equivalent of that in US dollars is 719 billion US dollars. The increased wealth of these 150 Indian billionaires during COVID could fund the Manrega, MGNREGA, for employment of the poor people in rural India for 30 years. More than 4.6 crore Indians, meanwhile, are estimated to have fallen into extreme poverty. In 2020, nearly half of the global new poor, according to the United Nations, now live in our country. So when such a situation exists, my dear friends, I would ask you, do we not need to ask this country to deliver its duty by asking for our rights? Is it not our right to sit and protest? Is it not our right to ask for those concepts that were promised to us by this marvelous document called the Constitution of India, of equality, justice, and of fighting poverty? Let's look at the institutional democracy that we've been left behind. we've been left behind a fantastic system in the Constitution, which has got us the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And the fourth pillar, which is media, which is supposed to act as a check and balance. And today, the fifth pillar is civil society. Because the media has failed us, the legislature has betrayed us, because the legislature does not even debate on the laws that it's supposed to debate on. It doesn't set up select committees and standing committees to examine the laws that are by nature complex and which need to be discussed, and where people have to go and testify in parliament. Those standing committees are not called there. Very often, ordinances are passed, which means you bypass the entire parliamentary procedure. Issues are not discussed. And let's see what happens when all this is done. We'll come to a few examples. Today, the fifth pillar is civil society. And what have we heard? We've heard the voice of the National Security Advisor, who has attacked civil society in his address to the police officers in the academy in Hyderabad, and persistently stated thereafter that the enemy now is not across the borders. The enemy doesn't lie outside India. That the enemy now is the fifth pillar of society, which is civil society. And that civil society articulation is the real enemy. When voices like this are heard, it could be a nightmare. It should be a nightmare. It should be something that warns us that actually if civil society doesn't exist, the nation doesn't exist. Because a very small percentage is the market, a very small percentage is government, and a very small percentage is business. The rest of us are civil society. We may be of all religions, all castes, all communities, we're all over the country, but we represent our civil society. So are we going to keep quiet and allow this branding on us to silence us is a question we have to now address. I talked about what are the ways by which legislative processes have been bypassed. Electoral bonds, which gives money to political parties without transparency. The PM Cares Fund is not transparent, not even under the purview of the Comptroller and Auditor General. Whatever right to information law has given to us in terms of transparency and attacking the impunity of the system, not to do what it wants, has brought it back through the back door. The passage of laws, the CAA laws, the farm laws were not discussed in Parliament. They should be discussed in Parliament. They should be discussed in fact, in my opinion, they should be discussed outside Parliament, amongst civil society, amongst people, to discuss whether such laws will benefit or not benefit people. Labor laws have all been truncated. Today, the poor, the trade unions are all suffering. So what are these things that are happening? And do we not raise our voice against it? And if we raise our voice against it as members of civil society, will we be damned as people who are enemies of the nation? It's a question that haunts most of us and hangs over our heads like a Damocles sword. But this is my country. It's my country. It's my nation. And I claim the Constitution as my Constitution. And the Constitution is also being corroded and weakened because of attacks on it. And I'll come to that very soon, and I'll finish with a few more remarks. So institutions that we set up for monitoring the state, democratic institutions, the commissions have all been weakened. I won't go into the details. The Election Commission, the Planning Commission has been made defunct. In that, Niti Aayog has come, which is not transparent. At least when the Planning Commission existed, I knew for 5 years what the country was going to do with me, or with the money, or with the planning process of this country. Today, there's silence. All commissions, the Election Commission has been compromised. All commissions have been compromised. Democratic processes, therefore, are compromised. If the Election Commission is compromised, elections are compromised. If the due process in Parliament is compromised, then the passage of the rule of law is compromised. And if the rule of law is compromised, then where do you and I stand in a country like India? By violating the equality of religion and by promoting violence and terror, we have limited the lexicon of communication and branding just about everything as religious terror. I feel so sad today that in the coming few days, in the beating retreat last year, they are going to, in the coming few days, they're not going to play Abide With Me in the beating of the retreat. This hymn, which Gandhiji loved, used to be the ending of the beating retreat every year on the 28th of January. Last year, there was a big public outcry that we don't want this removed. So they let it be. But this year, they have taken it off. And what is Abide With Me? Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers and friends and helpers flee, help of the helpless, abide with me. What is wrong with those lines? Is this not a universal statement of a person seeking fraternity, of a person seeking help and support from a situation of unhappiness, a situation of threat and fear? That has been removed. And I promise you that I think that it has been removed because they did not want Mahatma Gandhi anywhere. They didn't want his voice anywhere. And they also wanted to tell a minority where exactly they stood, that they can't feature as a part of the Republic Day parade anymore. I would question it. My friends have questioned it. Gopal Gandhi has written about it in the Hindustan Times. And we are all very worried that it's these small symbols. So symbol after symbol after symbol is being violated and co-opted. Federalism is threatened. In many ways, we are a federal republic and federalism is being threatened. And you know that free speech is being threatened in every which way. I'll quote Baba Sahib Ambedkar, B.R. Ambedkar, and he said, and I quote him, I do not know, but this much is certain, that if the parties place creed above country, our independence will be put in jeopardy a second time and probably be lost forever. This eventuality we must all resolutely guard against. We must be determined to defend our independence with the last drop of our blood. That was B.R. Ambedkar's warning to the nascent Indian nation that when creed becomes more than certain, that parties place creed above the country, when political system places creed above the country, India's independence will be in jeopardy. And this is not an extremist speaking. It is not a member of the civil society speaking. It's B.R. Ambedkar, one of the biggest icons of modern India, who has been co-opted by every single system, including the system that denies us the values of the Constitution. They also present him as an icon, but they have to keep the principles and the words alive and in action act as Baba Sahib Ambedkar would have acted. I read poetry as well. Social activists can also be other things. So I read poetry and I read Bertolt Brecht. And I remember those beautiful lines of his when he says, asks, in the dark times, will there also be singing? In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. So the voice of conscience and the voice of civil society and the voice of the Constitution cannot be silenced, because we will sing our way, we will dance our way, we will talk our way, we will write our way, because we will protest and there will be singing if the dark times do come. But there is hope, because the farm laws have shown us, the farmers of India have shown us that there is hope, through non-violent, non-cooperation, through civil disobedience. They have made us walk those few yards or miles into the realm of hope. We keep these utopias alive. We have to keep utopias alive, because the utopia always recedes as we walk towards the horizon. The horizon recedes, but we keep looking at the horizon. So the utopia is like the horizon. As we walk, it recedes. But the most important thing is that it makes us walk. So utopias have to exist like the horizon to make us walk. We have a slogan, a national slogan which says, Satyameva Jayate. The truth shall win. And it's towards this that we all speak out, with the Constitution backing us, We will continue to question. We will continue to talk truth to power, because that's the mandate that this republic gives me, that this constitution has given me, and that all my life as a public servant has given me, whether a public servant in the system or a public campaigner outside. I have been empowered by the constitution, empowered by the extraordinary morality and ethics of people who won this independence for me. And I am not willing to give it up easily. And I don't think many of us are willing to give up easily. The question is, we must absolutely articulate and talk about it and stand together as a fraternity across religions, across groups, across religion, language barriers, across states, to raise in one voice the need to keep the constitution alive as it is today and not allow any amendment to it. So we have a slogan in Hindi, Desh Bachao, Samvidhan Bachao, Samvidhan Bachao, Desh Bachao, because our nation needs the constitution more than anything else today. But I'm going to request you to please play this great song of Rabindranath Tagore, which emboldens us to walk towards the horizon. The famous song which Mahatma Gandhi also liked, called Akla Chalo Re. Please play.
যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে, তবে একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে, তবে একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি কেউ কথা না কয়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা, কেউ কথা না কয়, যদি সবাই থাকে মুখ ফিরায়ে সবাই করে ভয়, যদি সবাই থাকে মুখ ফিরায়ে সবাই করে ভয়, তবে পরাণ খুলে ও তুই মুখ ফুটে তোর মনের কথা একলা বলো রে, ও তুই মুখ ফুটে তোর মনের কথা একলা বলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা, সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাবার কালে কেউ ফিরে না চায়, যদি গহন পথে যাবার কালে কেউ ফিরে না চায়, তবে পথের কাঁটা ও তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলো রে, ও তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে।
Sharon. I just wanted to say at the end that this was a song created by Rabindranath Tagore for Mahatma Gandhi when he went on the Salt March, the Dandi March. And he said this song was to encourage Mahatma Gandhi to walk alone. The song says, walk alone. And if people don't respond to your call, just walk alone. And if people turn their faces away, still walk alone. And it's a fantastic song. And I wish I could translate the entire song, but I'm sure you could get the meaning somewhere. And it's this power of conviction, the power of justice, the power of faith. And faith comes in very many different forms. And I'm sure you all understand it much better than I. So let's hope that we all unite and that we will win this battle for justice, for equality, for fraternity, and for a decent and wonderful India. Thank you.
Thank you, Aruna Roy, for the challenging talk. Some of us may have a question to ask or comment on the lecture or on the given topic. Please hold on, time will be given. First, we will hear from the official respondent. For this, I will now invite Dr. Geevarghese Coorilos, Metropolitan Chairperson, World Student Christian Federation, to give the response. Sir, you may take the time.
Hello. Can you hear me all right?
You are audible. You are audible.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes,
Am I-
sir. You
okay,
can
thank
take
you.
the time.
Friends, at the very outset, I wish all of you a very meaningful Republic Day. I also take this opportunity to express my profound sense of gratitude and thanks to the organizers of this webinar, the Reverend Dr. Y.T. Vinayaraj, Director of the Christian Institute for the Study of Religion and Society, and the Reverend Imbaraj Jayakumar, the General Secretary of the Student Christian Movement of India. Both of them my very close friends and ecumenical colleagues, for having given me this honor and privilege to respond to the keynote address by Dr. Aruna Roy. I must take a bail at this stage, just to warn you that my response will not be a biblical theological response as Dr. Vinayaraj had indicated. My response, which would be a very brief one, would be basically a lay human, I didn't want to say layman's perspective, a lay human perspective. It's so nice to see several of my friends and colleagues on this virtual platform whom I haven't seen for a while. I also want to thank Dr. Aruna Roy for her profound and powerful presentation. As always, Dr. Aruna Roy has alerted us about the crisis that we are in, particularly at this time, the crisis of democracy in India today. We are immensely grateful and hugely indebted to you, ma'am, for what you are and for what you have been all these years, for being the voice of the voiceless, for your tireless efforts and campaigns for justice, particularly for the cause of the right to information, a landmark contribution that you've made to the cause of democracy in our country. I must also say that this webinar could not have been organized on a better day as we commemorate our nation's Republic Day today. India is widely known as the largest democracy in the world. And yet, as we reflect on the future of democracy in our country, we must say, regretfully, of course, that the largest democracy in the world has become today the largest pseudo-democracy in the world. This is particularly true in the pandemic-stricken world that we are in today. As we are all well aware, the term democracy has its roots in the Greek terms demos, which means people, and kratos, which means rule. Democracy, therefore, meaning rule of people, people's rule. But where is the demos, people in democracy today? September 15th is celebrated as the United Nations International Day of Democracy every year. In our country, we celebrated 70 years of constitutional democracy in 2020. This year it is the 73rd. But what is the actual state of democracy in our country today? And this has been beautifully portrayed to us by Dr. Aruna Roy. In fact, apart from the precious human lives that have been lost to the coronavirus, one of the greatest casualties of the COVID pandemic has been democracy itself. Using COVID-19 as a convenient shield, several nations have imposed what might be called undeclared emergency. Official reports say that at least 80 countries have gone that route. India is no exception. In fact, in our country, there have been signs of an undeclared emergency even before the arrival of the pandemic. The pandemic, if anything, has only accelerated this process. Therefore, it is time, as Dr. Roy has alerted us, for some serious soul searching, some critical introspection. No superficial analysis would do. We need to go deeper into the roots of the crisis. P. Sainath, one of my favorite thinkers and journalists of our country, takes us to the roots of the problem, and he reminds us that the Indian form of democracy is essentially a Western, particularly a British Westminster model of democracy, which was built and founded on the ideals articulated by people like Thomas Jefferson and Adam Smith, who spoke and wrote extensively on the idea of democracy. Yet we tend to overlook, Sainath reminds us, the fact that they were actually slave owners, Jefferson and Adam Smith. They practiced slavery at home. They were racist who defended slavery. What is therefore overlooked is the fact that Western British model of democracy was actually founded on the pillars of racism and slavery. And this is the reason why Gandhi called Western democracy a diluted form of fascism. Remember, Gandhi did not call democracy a diluted form of fascism, but Western democracy. However, while inheriting and adopting the British form of democracy, which is rooted in the imperial notions of slavery and racism, India has managed to situate and relocate democracy within the structures of casteism in our country, the Indian version of slavery and racism. And today, this casteist version of Indian democracy has assumed fascist and dictatorial dimensions. What is beheld and experienced in India today is not even a diluted version of fascism, but its full-fledged form. Dr. Lawrence Britt, a British political scientist, has written a seminal piece on fascism in the Free Inquiry magazine, where he expounds some 14 salient features that would define fascism. These include, among other things, features such as total disdain for human rights, extreme versions of nationalism, worship of the military, glorification of wars, censoring of press and media, persecution of minorities, women, and other marginalized communities, theocracy, undue protection for the corporate sector, and so on and so forth. And basing their research on Lawrence Britt's thesis, sociologists and political scientists in India have argued that in fact, all these 14 characteristics of fascism that Lawrence Britt talks about are indeed present in India today. Therefore, fascism is here. It has made its presence felt even in our kitchens. What this means is that we are no more a democracy. We have never been one, as I have been trying to argue. As Ramachandra Guha observes, we are only a mere electoral democracy, nothing more, nothing less. Except the fact that we hold elections every 5 years, there is hardly any democracy left. The litmus test for real democracy is the status of fundamental human rights. People's right to dignity, food, clothing, and shelter. On these counts, India today stands way, way below. According to the United Nations World Happiness Index report, published in 2020, India ranked 144th out of 153 countries that were evaluated. Therefore, we have no right whatsoever to call ourselves a democracy when the majority of our population is still discriminated on the basis of caste, gender, race, color, religion, ethnicity, you name it. And this is important. And this is why Baba Sahib Dr. Ambedkar made an important distinction between what he called political democracy and social democracy in India. One could say that we still have a certain degree of political democracy, as I said, with elections held every 5 years, but we are still too far away from being a social democracy. COVID-19, if anything, has exposed this reality beyond any contention. We witness, for example, thousands and thousands of migrant workers on the move, on barefoot, walking miles and miles, days and nights to reach their home states during the COVID lockdown period. Imagine there was no prior warning about the shutdown. It was declared all on a sudden. These poor workers were left with no job, no food, no medical care for several days. And they were forced to go back to their home states on foot. And don't we remember those images? Those images of torn apart feet of thousands of migrant workers that we saw on media? Those images were truly an image of the status of democracy in our country today. A democracy that is completely torn apart. A democracy that is bleeding. During the reign of Mrs. Gandhi, we witnessed democracy being torn apart when she declared emergency in our country. And later in the 1990s, with the introduction of what we call economic liberalization, corporatization announced its arrival. Yet again, democracy being the greatest casualty. And we have seen governments, as Dr. Roy has reminded us this evening, we have seen governments imposing pro-corporate and anti-poor policies, even bypassing parliaments and assemblies. And now with the arrival of the Hindutva politics and rule in India, an unholy alliance between Savarna fascism and corporatist capitalism has been forged, where people, demos, or the Oiklos, to use a biblical concept, the poor, Dalits, Adivasis, women, the minorities, the marginalized, have been reduced to the status of no people. Worse still is the fact that we are now moving towards some form of theocracy in India. At least during the emergency period, Mrs. Gandhi did not play with secularism. Our constitution wasn't put under threat. Today, though, theocracy is supplanting democracy in India, that too at a rapid pace. Theocracy in India is being founded on the ideals of Hindutva ideology. Ideals of people like Goldwalker, who had absolute disdain for democracy. Goldwalker, himself a huge fan of Hitler, held that politics simply had to follow the precepts of religion, which in India for him was Manu Dharma. And we have been seeing signs of all this through anti-reservation policies, anti-conversion bills that are being implemented in different states, persecution of minority communities in different parts of the country, attempts to introduce a uniform civil code, the Ayodhya issue, Gotra, Kandamal, you name it. And of late, the Citizenship Amendment Act, the so-called CAA. The CAA proved beyond any doubt which direction India is now moving, the direction of theocracy. Religion has been made a criterion, a basic criterion to determine one's citizenship in our country. A complete violation of the secular spirit of our constitution that we are supposed to celebrate today. People like Professor Rajasri Chandra calls this constitutional theocracy, a clear and subtle move by the ruling class to impose Hindutva version of theocracy and to give it some form of constitutional frame about it. This is where we are as a nation today. Our constitutional democracy is being thrashed and replaced by a brand of constitutional theocracy. Friends, the only way we can defend democracy, as Dr. Aruna has repeatedly told us, is by resisting, by protesting these fascist tendencies and totalitarianism. And we have such models from our farmer struggle. The historic farmer struggle was not merely a struggle for farmers' rights. It was much more than that. I think it was essentially a struggle to defend democracy in our country. Theologically speaking, the vanguard of social transformation, revolution, is the people, the oppressed, the Coorilos, the multitude, to use a concept popularized by Hart and Negri, an alternate democratic force in space. The early church was such a movement. It was a movement led by the Coorilos, the multitude, the democratic space that resisted the rule and dictates of the then empire and made sure that the empires did fall. Therefore, our basic task today is to be the multitude and to be with the multitude who are in struggle to defend democracy, dignity, and justice. As Baba Sahib would remind us, the challenge today is to educate, to organize, and to agitate. With these few words, I would like to once again thank Dr. Aruna Roy for her challenging and enlightening presentation, and to Dr. Vinay Raj and Reverend Imbaraj for having given me this honor and privilege to share some of my thoughts. Thank you everyone for your patience. God bless.
Thank you, Dr. Geevarghese, for the response. Now, I open the floor to anybody for question and comments. The allotted given time is 3 to 5 minutes maximum. You can unmute yourself and talk. If not, you can write the question in the chat box. Yes, time is given to anybody.
Will who,
Yes.
if I may?
Oh, yes, you can.
First of all, thank you both to Aruna and Bishop George. I really don't have words to say of how encouraged and strong I feel right now. I guess this is a question to both of you, is that both of you have addressed some very, very serious issues in terms of pseudo-democracy and challenges that we face by this current regime and also fascism. And my question is, what would be your plea, especially to us, our churches and who belong to some faith-based movements, to face these current challenges and threats posed by the regime? What would be your plea, and how should we be responding in practical terms before it becomes too late? How can we be the voice of advocacy and action to counter what Aruna was saying? There's a systemic attempt with symbolic attacks on the minorities that we talked about, Aruna, and that we see today.
Does Father want to take the question first?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Should I go ahead? All right.
Please.
Actually, you know, it is the biggest challenge in modern times, and it's a challenge for all of us. But we must absolutely unite. I mean, there has been so much talk about it, but we have not been able to hold hands across various divides. And I think the most important thing that we have to now forge is a platform on which we all come together. We've been making efforts. We've been, I'm on 6 or 7 platforms, and these platforms are slowly emerging to come out of their shells and hold hands. But the most important thing for us today is to understand that we can't keep quiet. Our methods of expression may be different. Our methods of protest may be different, but 2 things are going to kill us. One is fear, and we can't be afraid, because the moment we are afraid, the persons who want us to be afraid have won their battle anyway. But we also can't be foolish. So we cannot indulge in acts that will disallow us the freedom even to express it in one form or the other. So it's a challenge. So it's our numbers. And I think one very important thing I've recognized in the last 10 years of my life is that we have not educated our people in politics. I don't mean becoming a member of a political party, but in political democracy. They have not educated them in constitutional democracy. And so for the last 10 years, I have been spending time at the grassroots, talking to people, not really just giving them a slogan and walking off, but to sit with them and to understand why they have the ideas that they have. I want to quickly tell you, I saw a WhatsApp message, and this WhatsApp message shocked me. It's been taken by a young man in Bombay, just on the street. And he says, I want to talk to you bros. Come and tell me what you mean. What do you understand by the Constitution? Bizarre answers have come. And I wouldn't have believed the level of ignorance of people, young people who are attending university and colleges. Somebody said the Constitution was written in 1944. Somebody said that the name of the Prime Minister of India was Manmohan Singh. Somebody said, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, we thought of education as a means by which we would not only get literate, but we would understand, and that we would become members of a civil society or members of public life, members of a congregation, if you like, where they would be intelligent. But I find more and more that the whole educational system has gone to rot. I remember I went to ordinary schools. I mean, I went to private schools. I did not go to a government school, but I did not go to a very expensive public school. I went to ordinary schools. But in my schools, we grew up as citizens of the nation. We didn't grow up as individuals who are capable of being debunked at the smallest point. And if this is the kind of response you have from young people who are prospective voters, I think we'll have to absolutely spend great amount of time just telling people of what the Constitution is, what we are. And we have started working with constitutional fellows. We are working at the grassroots. We are talking everywhere about the Constitution. It's taken us now 15 years of constant talk about the Constitution to get people aware that a book like this exists. 20 years ago, I went to the Indian Institute of Science for a lecture, and I asked our eminent scientists how many of them had ever read the Constitution, and 2 hands went up. People used to think that if they were in some other vocation, the Constitution existed as a kind of a symbol or a decoration on the wall or on a shelf, that it didn't matter to them. But today we realize how vital it is for our lives. But the Constitution has to be interpreted in the context of everyone's lives. It cannot be just a constitution. We've been going around talking about how the right to freedom of expression gives you the RTI. The right to freedom of expression gives you your schools. The right to education also gives you your schools. So why it's important to have that? Why the right to equality is important. As a woman, I will be denied all the rights I have gained. Will you be happy to get all the rights denied? Many of the laws that have come from an acceptance of equality for promoting my gender equality will all go. Am I happy? If I am a person who does not believe in discrimination, all my rights have come from the constitutional right to equality. How will I be if all these are removed? And what if these are corroded by laws like the CAA, by like electoral bonds coming in, laws being passed which derail the Constitution without it being actually derailed? What Reverend Carlos called the undeclared emergency. So in this undeclared emergency, where do I stand? How do I fight my battle? How do I fight this battle when I'm ignorant, when I'm illiterate in politics, illiterate in understanding? I'm literate, mind you. I passed my higher secondary exam, but I do not know what this country is. I do not know who my prime minister is. I do not know what my political system is. I don't know how I operate. So we have got these hollow vessels into which propaganda is pouring in exactly what it wants to. There is no response to that propaganda because there is no history. There is no political history. In Rajasthan, for instance, I'll stop after this example. In Rajasthan, for instance, somebody asked, I was with someone who asked a group of people, what is the relationship between Sonia Gandhi and Mahatma Gandhi? And they said she is his granddaughter-in-law. So if you have this kind of impression, the name Gandhi, I mean, you can have a trader called Gandhi, but that doesn't make any difference. But if you enter politics, you have the name of Gandhi, then you can play around with it. You can play around with so many different things today don't make any sense to us. But if you are ignorant and if you're uninformed, it can be lethal. And we have a whole new group of techies, of technocrats with big jobs and big money who do not have any access, have never had any access to social sciences, who have never studied politics, have never studied political science, who do not understand constitutional democracy at all, and who are loud in their praise for constraint and for attacks on all sorts of minority opinions. So we have a huge battle to fight, a huge educational agenda. And since many of you are educationists, I would say think about it. Think about how we can educate the people in all the languages of India. And if we write in English, simple English, we write in any other language, simple idiomatic language, in a way in which it's not only understandable, relatable to individuals. And I think that's one thing which we can all do. Our neighbors, our friends, the schools we are in, the colleges we are in, the society we are in, the friends we are in, just dismantle this ignorance, and we have reached a little way ahead. And I think it does make a difference, because in the people that we have worked with, the rural youth we have worked with, it does make a difference as soon as they understand the Constitution. Baba Adhav, a very famous social activist in Maharashtra, he has said every village should have a Samvidhan Manch, a constitution platform. We are trying to create that now, so that every village has a space where you not get together, not to fight power politics, but to understand the Constitution. There are many ways with which we can do it, but we'll all have to begin somewhere, and we all have to come together. And we all have to have a common program which everywhere in India resonates with every other place, so that we become a big unity with maintaining our diversity and maintaining our differences.
Thank you, ma'am. Bishop, you want to say something?
Thank you, Dr. Vinaraj, and thank you for that very important question, which I think is a tough one to deal with. I also see many church leaders, some of whom were very important leaders of mainline churches and ecumenical movements in our country. I hope they would also respond to this important question. I just want to begin by saying that the problem that we are facing as the church in India is that we are suffering from a certain bankruptcy. Churches are suffering from what I would like to call a moral bankruptcy, a prophetic bankruptcy. We have lost that prophetic voice. I have the feeling, I mean, it's one thing to be silent. That itself is shocking in the face of all these atrocities and persecution that is happening. To be quiet is itself shocking. But even more worrying, deeply worrying that is the fact that some of our churches and some of our ecumenical organizations and its leaders are even trying to appease the powers that be, the fascist regimes in our country. And this is where the fear factor comes in a different level. I have the feeling that some of our organizations and some of our leaders are scared about the regime. They might be worried about IT raids and ED interventions and things like that. That is why I say, we have lost that morality that we hold very high in Christian in theology and spirituality. We are suffering from that kind of a bankruptcy, which is moral and prophetic. I think we need to go back to the early church model, which I referred to. The early church, the first church, was basically a Jesus movement, a people's movement. It was an anti-empire movement. They had the audacity, even in the midst of severe persecution by the empire, they had the audacity, prophetic audacity, to challenge the empire, to speak the truth to powers. And this is what we need to regain. I think probably the remnant that is there within the mainline churches and ecumenical organizations. In fact, a few of us had a Zoom meeting just last week to address precisely this question. What can we do? This silence is sickening. Some of the stands taken by our leaders, church leaders and leaders of the ecumenical movement, walking side by side with the powers that be, appeasing them, betraying our communities, the oppressed. How can we address this situation of crisis? This is what we were debating. And we have come to the conclusion that, we may be a small remnant, but remnant is a biblical concept. It is a small remnant that made the prophetic cry loud and made all that difference. I think if we can all come together and join with the civil society, fifth pillar, as ma'am has reminded us, I think we can make a difference. I think we need to regain that moral credibility that we have lost somewhere along the lines. We need to challenge ourselves, our leaders, our church structures, which have become an empire in itself. I think that will, if we do that, we will regain some of those credibility that we had lost. That will empower us even more to challenge the powers that be, the fascist forces that impose their sense of rule on us.
Do we have any more questions? If not, we will move forward.
I have a question. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can.
Actually, I posted my question in the chat box. Again, I want to thank Dr. Aruna. This morning, I was hoisting the flag and I was speaking about the preamble of our constitution to the audience. And there are 3 pillars actually in the preamble. And now Dr. Aruna has that there are 2 more pillars, like the media and the civil society. So whether it is included in the amendment or just we take it for granted that there are these 2 powerful things are existing. So just I want to get a light from this discussion. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I don't think the Constitution quite defines us in those terms. But if you look at the directive principles of state policy, I think that empowers us to be the voice of the people who are unequal, the voices of people who have been denied their fundamental rights. I mean, we don't have a formal nomenclature that gives us this dignity, but what gives us the dignity is our own perception of morality, of public ethics, of constitutional rights, of fundamental rights, of the denial of his right to survive with dignity with our people. And then I'm sure that Bishop will agree with me, and all the reverends and other friends will also agree with me, that it's not a matter of religion, it's a matter of humanity. And when it is a matter of humanity, it's not a matter of religion. And I think what has been denied by these religious fundamentalists, these Hindutva groups, is a denial of Hinduism itself. Because by acting as they do, they deny humanity, they deny the principles of Hinduism, of what could at points, I mean, it's a very huge religion and it's got many interpretations, but much of it was based on tolerance. Much of it has been based on discrimination. So while the discrimination was terrible, but it was also a tolerant society in many ways, which allowed all kinds of people to come and settle on this land without persecution. So we have actually shrunk into the lowest common denominator of what a Hindu can be. So in some sense, we must have the Hindu speak out and speak out against this kind of Hinduism, which is also a very, very soft whisper now. Most people are not talking against this kind of religion. And I remember when I was in Gujarat during the genocide, and I remember going as part of an inquiry team and going and talking to victims of that violence, who said to me, it's all right, you're speaking it, but we want the Hindus, because they didn't identify me as a Hindu, because I was reaching out to them and talking in a language which is not like a Hindu. But I am I don't know what I am, but I'm a cultural Hindu, I guess, because I wear a bindi and I do all the various things of a cultural Hindu. I am a citizen of the world, and I do think I'm a secular Indian citizen. But to them, they didn't want me. They didn't want a social activist. They wanted a good religious Hindu leader to tell Hindus that this was not Hinduism. So I think within each religion, now we are asking for the precepts, of a great man called Jesus, who lived and died and who showed humanity the beautiful concept of compassion and kindness. We need him to come alive in each one of our hearts. We needn't be Christians, we needn't convert, but we have to understand what drove that man to the cross. We also have to understand what all those principles that have lived in a large variety of ways in India, because it's amongst the Hindus in a plural way, come to life. So these are the discourses. We have to talk about Raja Ram Mohan Roy. We have to talk about Narayan Guru. We have to talk about Phule. We have to talk about all the reformists. We have to talk about Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. The Hindus have to do the talking to say that Hinduism is not what it's painted to be. Christians have to argue that Christianity is what it is. And I think in that context, we don't need a mandate from the Constitution in terms of a fixed category. We are the people of India. We are the sovereign of India. So we, the people of India, we, the sovereign of India, we have more right than any categories enumerated in the Constitution to say what we want to say. We have to realize that sovereignty and we have to feel that sovereignty. And I think that's why we are such a threat to the state or to governments, that they fear us so much. I mean, what do we have? We don't have wealth. We don't have status. We don't have violent powers of violence. We don't have anything. But why are we such a threat that they should come out to say that we are the enemies of the state and the country? It's because we have the moral power to stand and withstand all kinds of attacks, which all of you also have. I think moral power is a very strong thing, whether it was Ambedkar or Gandhi or Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, they have that power. And it's because of that power that we got our independence. And I think we need to now really protect our independence, real independence. And for that, we need to go outside those categories. And we also have to think of ourselves as sovereign Indians. And I think you all understand what I'm trying to say. I've got a little emotional maybe, or a little passionate maybe, but underlying all this is an ethical principle of being a sovereign Indian citizen.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Aruna Roy and Dr. Geevarghese for responding to the questions. We have come to the end of our meeting. And to conclude it, I now invite Reverend Imbaraj Jayakumar, General Secretary of Student Christian Movement of India, to say a word of thanks and to give the concluding remarks.
Friends, we live in critical times where the fundamental forces continuously tries to weaken the Constitution. Thank you, Dr. Aruna Roy, to tell us, in this world of lies, speak the truth with the Constitution backing us. Thank you very much for challenging us. Thank you, Bishop Dr. Coorilos, once again reminding us that people's movements is the hope for future, so that we should educate, organize, and agitate. We cannot keep silent anymore. Friends, thank you each and every participant of this webinar. We continue to talk, we continue to resist, we continue to protest, so that the rights are to be gained, and we don't lose hope. So with these words, I thank each and every one of you, and special thanks to Dr. Viniraj for organizing this webinar along with SCMI. Thank you so much.